start this talk out 2 years ago. Yes, that's a picture of me looking basically the same, but I promise it's not a talk about recursion. All right? So 2 years ago, I gave a talk, and it was called The Packaging Gradient. And as you can imagine, it was about packaging. Right? It's about how to package Python software, the difference between libraries, applications, et cetera, et cetera. And can anyone guess what happened after I finished this talk? No, it's just first question, right? Okay, I developed that Django application, and I'm trying to get it onto my internal cloud. How do I do that? Second question, right? I made a nice GUI application for my dad to do his accounting, and then I actually got a scientific computing model. I need to, and then and so I was basically just flooded with questions from this talk. And I'm not trying to be an ungrateful speaker. It was actually really gratifying in a way, but really, the larger question that I saw here was, what am I going to do about all these questions? Surely there has to be a better way. So basically, that's where this talk comes from, and I call it Ask the Ecosystem. Don't ask me, right? Lessons from 250 plus FOSS applications. I know the schedule says 200 plus, but the list is growing. So yeah, let's get it started. So first of all, let's see a show of hands as I go down this list. Do you recognize any of these names? Anki? Oh, wow, good number. BleachBit? Not many Windows users. Deluge? Okay. FreeCAD? Okay. Home Assistant? Good number. Music Brains Picard? Ah, yeah, we're on the same page. Gotta get those ID3 tags right. Odoo? You should recognize this if you come up to 101. Right behind that Twilio billboard is the Odoo building. Reddit. Ah, okay. Sabnizbada. Okay, that's a Usenet thing. And YouTube DL. Oh, nice. Gotta back up those vids. Some of you on the camera right now. YouTube DL this video right now. Okay, so yeah, let's see. Yeah, so what do we know about these applications? What can we guess? You've anticipated my denouement. No, the fact is that they're popular, right? I saw a lot of hands here. And they're actually targeted primarily at non-programmers. I know you're thinking YouTube DL is a CLI. Trust me, a lot of DJs learned how to use their terminal in order to get their track lists, all right? And yes, they are in fact written in open source Python, but interestingly not marketed as such. Right? It's not like, hey, use my Python software. No, it's like, use my useful software that actually does a good job. Happens to be written in Python. Okay, so these are all really great things. In fact, this is pretty inspiring to me. This is a pretty inspiring list, and it's much longer, actually, than that. So let's talk goals, right? Now that we're inspired. Why do we code? This is something I think about a lot, every Monday, in fact. So, reasons to code. I polled a few people. Here's why we get up and write code. One, GitHub called, and it needs another unit testing library. Okay? There's the utility. It needs to be written. Google deprecated an API. That inspires me to code pretty quick. Got to replace the API. Also, sales said that your product does something that it doesn't, actually. Yeah, that's a real one. And also, last quarter, your manager said that you need to work on setting more aggressive OKRs. It's almost the end of the quarter, so you really got to get coding. So, yeah, these are sort of the reasons that we kind of code on a daily basis if you're, in a startup or in a corporate setting or something like that. But realistically, when I think about it, there are two main reasons that spark the desire for someone to want to code. Right? There are two main interactions. It's like, one, this video game's awesome. I mean, you're like an 8-year-old, and you're like, I want to make a video game someday. Or two, it's your 10th year of looking at Excel, and it's doing some n-cubed factorial algorithm, and you're waiting for your tab to load, and you're just like, I need to be free of this, and someone said that Python has pandas. I don't know what that means. So yeah, these are the main two reasons. And so getting back to that root of programming, right? Who here came to build, right? A lot of love to those Excel people, right? But who here came to build software for people to use, possibly yourself? Yes, lots of hands. I see the excitement welling up inside of you. Okay, so, but wait, how do you do that again? Right? I've been busy, pip installing and so forth, but how do I actually get this thing to be a usable state? And so basically, we get a lot of questions. A lot of people have those questions. How do we do X in Python? And so we have testing questions, packaging questions, architecture questions, performance questions, documentation questions, etc. And so the community has responded, right? We're getting these questions, so I know what we need. We need Stack Overflow answers for those questions. We need blog posts. We need video tutorials. We need tweet rants, right? And we obviously need conference talks. You know, we're going to answer all those questions, and we're going to build good software from it. You know, but really what I started to see from this, the bigger pattern that I got off of 2 years of living with the packaging gradient under my belt is that, like, we have this XY problem, right? People are coming to you with little questions, looking for little answers to the wrong questions instead of big answers to big, correct questions. Anyone here not know what the XY problem is? Basically what it means is someone shows up in your IRC or Discord and it's like, I need the last 3 letters of a file name. And you're like, okay, well here's like the way that you do that, but why do you need the last 3 letters of the file name? Are you looking for the file extension? And they're like, yes, I need the file extension. It's like, okay, but what if the file extension is 1 letter or 2 letter or 4 letters? Here's how you do, like, you know, the extension of a file, os.path.splitext. Not just getting the last 3 letters of a string. So they asked sort of a small question that would have made them write the wrong software instead of asking what they actually needed. And so I'm here to present an alternative. Figure out what kind of application you want to write, find another application like that one, and then read and reuse the architectures and patterns within that application. When I was at PayPal, one day I was searching through the internal GitHub, and I found a second copy of an application that I had written. A pretty big Django app, in fact. And they just hadn't changed any of it except for 5 functions where they needed the business logic change to do something different for a completely different service. And they launched it all the way to production, and there was a team of 4 people supporting that application. And it was providing a lot of value to the company. And really, I was pretty excited. But I'm like, you guys should have just told me that you were going to do this so that, like, we could actually support you. But I was actually much more impressed that they were able to just, like, copy and reuse and go to prod. You know? And I think that is the sort of thing that we need more inside the Python community. We're reinventing too much from first principles and Stack Overflow posts. So basically, we need case studies to complement our learning. That means we need awesome Python applications. All right. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about, a list of awesome Python applications. Looks like this. You can find it on GitHub. It's at this link down here, bit.ly/asktheeco. And yeah, so it doesn't look like much, but let's break it down word by word. So awesome. Anyone here familiar with awesome lists? You heard of awesome lists? You're probably wondering, like, man, we have awesome Python. You know, we have awesome, like, machine learning. I'll go into a little bit of what awesome is. So basically, awesome lists is a phenomenon on GitHub where basically someone will have a README that everyone pull requests into that is a list of links. You know, it's just a list of links to other resources. And you know, back in my day, we called this a wiki. You know, and there wasn't the whole pull request thing. You would just sort of put it on the moin. And you know, but like wikis, they go stale. And so the problem with like, you know, whether it's an awesome list or you know, which is kind of curated by one person usually, or it's a wiki, is that these things go stale. So the curation gets a little bit tedious, and people get burned out and they don't want to update the list anymore. But that said, we're going to come back to that. That said, it's still a mostly awesome list. It's like a resource hub. If you're getting started with Python, here are the libraries that you want to check out in order to write your applications. Still got the XY thing going on, but you know, it's better than trying to like Google search it all yourself. Okay, second like thing, Python. This is the obvious choice. And frankly, you probably don't even need me to explain to you what Python is. But I will pose to you a question. Are you making the most of using Python? You're part of this, like one of the most successful programming languages, most successful intellectual movements ever witnessed, right? How are you leveraging that? How are you pushing that advantage, right? So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what this talk is about. I think you'll have an answer by the end. Yeah, and it's finally applications. Applications as opposed to what? So little like distinction I like to draw people's attention to. Basically, libraries are developer-facing. They are compiled or imported and you pip install them from PyPI. It looks like this. And oftentimes in these conferences, we talk about pip install so much that we get kind of this echo chamber of mostly thinking in terms of libraries that you import in a notebook or something like that. Applications, on the other hand, once we re-enter the real world, like, you know, they're user-facing. We all use them. They're configured, not compiled, unless you're using Arch or something. And you don't pip install them, you just kind of install them. You know, it used to look like this, get a nice install shield wizard going. Then we had the App Store, then we had the Windows App Store, and then now we have, I don't know, the Snap Store or whatever. And so you just install the applications. Yeah, so libraries versus applications, two different beasts. And so APA is a list of awesome Python applications, and it's actually much more than the README. Not only does it have descriptions and links and tags, but it's actually structured YAML and it's generated. And so kind of what I'm going to go into for the remainder of the talk is all of the delicious structured information and how to delve into that. So, you know, enough talk, let's look at the data. I'll note that this data was last pulled August 17th, so it is hot, white hot, molten hot, like, you know, fresh off the presses data. But it's going to change. So if you go check out some of the stuff now, obviously it's going to be a little bit different, but you're seeing it live. So I went to every single repo that's linked in awesome Python applications, 254 repos, I believe, right now, and I cloned it. And it was 29 gigabytes of software, just the source and the version. You know, that's the clone. And you know, these repos are in Git repositories, Mercurial repositories, and Bazaar repositories, you know. And even the Git stuff, that's not just from GitHub. That's from GitLab, that's from private Git repos, you know. It was kind of tough to track this stuff down. And I'm going to ask you for your help with that later. But 29 gigabytes of code. 95% of these have been committed to in 2019. So I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff here. I want you to remember when you look at these graphs, all of these things, all of these projects, pretty much all of them, are moving forward, are active, are happening now. Almost 19 million lines of code across such a variety of languages that you haven't seen before. You know, majority Python. Almost 2 million commits across all those repos. Almost 50,000 committers. 50,000 committers, we're looking at like the size of major corporations. Like even IBM doesn't have, I think, 50,000 engineers. PayPal, when I was there, had 18,000 people, 3,000 engineers. Okay, big numbers aside, let's start delving into what this means. So first off, let's look at the architecture. What hath FOSS wrought? So it's really hard to taxonomize this many projects with this kind of variety, but I did the best I could. The first distinction I would make is that 36% of them have a server architecture, 64% of them have a desktop architecture. And some of these desktop applications actually do have some form of server mode as well, such as, for instance, like Deluge is actually a GUI application, but it does have a server mode that it can run in and have multiple users. But when it comes down to it, if it's a desktop application, it means it was originally written for single user interactive usage, mostly. And that includes CLIs, which is one of the reasons that you see so many of them. Now, over time, you know, this is what that kind of looks like. So desktop style architecture like goes all the way back. The oldest application here is from 1998, and it is Mailman, followed very shortly by gedit, both of which were started in 1998. Yeah, it sort of goes from there. So you can see here like sort of the explosion in the mid-2000s and sort of the continuing like explosion. You'll see that like it looks like it tapers off currently, but that's because most projects that were started in the last year are not really mature enough to be included as an exemplar. That's all. I expect to see that this like trend continues, this nice thick band of new projects. So while I'm introducing this format, because we're going to see it quite a bit, each of these dots is when the project started, not like when it was last updated or when I'm looking at it. All of these dots were updated in 2019 as far as you're concerned. This is like an example of the most advanced graph that I could come up with on short order. All this was done in the last week. And so all this is demonstrating is that as projects get bigger and older, they tend to be consisting more of Python, which is a little bit surprising to me. Anyways, I'll continue the analysis down the road. But that Python ratio is pretty interesting, and that leads me to the first Python application spotlight here. This is one of my favorite discoveries out of the list of 250. I saw all different sorts, all different beasts, shiny and otherwise. Ganetti. Anyone here heard of Ganetti? Okay. Got an exciting revelation for you. So it's got 16,000 commits since 2007. It's a cluster management tool that focuses on long-lived VMs used for workloads without built-in redundancy, meaning they're not really suitable for what we would consider like the cloud, you know, like ephemeral GCP style, like, you know, sort of machines, containers, etc. And it's still, it's developed at Google originally, although it doesn't bear too many markings of it other than active Google groups and so forth. It's widely deployed. When I searched Ganetti, if you can search like Ganetti versus OpenStack, and like Wikimedia has a whole breakdown of why they ended up going with Ganetti for certain types of analytical workloads. It's 60% Python, and here's the exciting bit, it's 20% Haskell. It's a Python-Haskell hybrid, and it uses like provable whatevers to generate Python to give like very high reliability. I'm sure that was what the pitch must have been internally at Google when someone said I'm going to go create a Haskell application. Like we thought that Python's a hard sell, but Python, Haskell, wow. The other 20% is Dart. Just kidding, that would be too crazy. Okay, so yeah, Ganetti, it's pretty interesting. It has like 200 stars on GitHub, and it's actively maintained, looks like it's actively used. It's a pretty interesting beast, check it out. Okay, secondly, dependencies. Now, I said a lot of the applications are GUI, and so graphical user interface like is a very fundamental architecture like decision you're going to make. What are you going to depend on? What framework are you going to depend on? And we've looked at, if you've ever looked at this, you've probably heard of tkinter being the one that's like built into Python. But most applications don't really go full production using tkinter. There's one in the list called Thani. Anyways, it doesn't really even make the cut here because I forgot to search for tkinter. So anyways, but there's Qt, GTK, and these other big names. And the breakdown looks a little bit like this. So almost half of applications on the list are Qt applications, and 30% are GTK. And I do have sub-breakdowns of which versions of Qt and GTK those are. It's just like too complicated of a pie chart. Some things use WX widgets, and I was really excited to look for Beware and Kivy, but I really only found a couple of applications that were using Kivy. Beware and Kivy let you do cross-platform application development, you know, like in a way that you can just do it in Python and not have to learn Kotlin or whatever, you know, like native thing is recommended by the corporation of choice. So yeah, and then there was one PyGame, but that's sort of an archival repo. Frets of Fire, for all your Guitar Hero fans. Okay, so over time it looks like this, and this I thought was a really interesting finding, is that all of these projects are active, once again, but if you're starting a new project today and you want to develop it in GUI, Qt is what people seem to trust. You know, GTK, again, these applications are active, used, installed, hundreds of thousands of users most likely in aggregate, but Qt is the framework of choice according to the applications I could find. If you know of a Beware application or a Kivy application that really represents something that has a user base and is more than just a toy, let me know. I want to add it to the list. Okay. Server frameworks. Here's the exciting part. Here's what it is. So 55% of the applications that have a server architecture are using Django, and 21% are using Flask. We got Pylon still in there, Pyramid, even some Zope, and you know, my first little web framework love, Bottle, you know, which of course Flask kind of knows about as well. All right, so over time, here's what it looks like. So Zope, of course, the first on the board, but you know, and you can see Pylon sort of like there in history, but like Pyramid's coming up. Django is like the solid one, but Flask you'll see like, you know, right around like 2016 there are 3 applications when there are no Django applications being started. So Flask, you know, has that youth, that freshness. And you're probably wondering like, you know, what is this very old Flask application from 2007? This is a trend you're going to start seeing more through this. These are actually old projects that adopted new frameworks, which I think is a really interesting story for anyone that's done any sort of migration. That's one of the main things that you're probably going to want to know. If you're a maintainer, You want to know about other applications that transitioned from something old to something new and what their story was. Probably no one wrote the blog post. It may never have made a conference talk. But using a little bit of sleuthing, right, you can find exemplars that can sort of like be that solidarity as you try to bring your application into the future. Concurrency, always a hot topic, you know. Anyone guess what the top concurrency library in use is? Oh, okay, okay. I hear some things. It's actually an interesting trick question. It's basically an even split down the line as far as the ones I searched for. Yeah, they're all around like 20%. You know, Twisted, Tornado, G-Event, Concurrent Futures, Async IO. They're all in action there. And you'll see Concurrent Futures is like floundering a little bit, and that's probably like, you know, because Async IO is built in now too. I know you want to know what this looks like over time. And it's a really interesting even split again. The most interesting parts, like I mentioned before, Async IO is being used by some really old projects that still have life. They've been adopted. Mailman's got Async IO in it, turns out, right? I think Portage even has like Async IO. Portage, Gentoo users in here, I saw an Async IO import inside of their package manager called Portage, meant to be like BSD ports. Anyways, we'll talk about Gentoo later. You know, again, it's a pretty interesting, like, even split across the board. Looks like all of these are still viable. If you're already in one of these architectures, then you'll probably want to go learn lessons from those applications that use that. And probably the hottest topic of all, the Python compatibility. This is the scariest pie chart. This is the hardest one for me to look at because basically we've seen how hard it has been to sort of bring the library ecosystem into the Python 3 world. Right? Anyone else have like a pit in their stomach right now wondering if the applications are going to all just end up porting to Electron or something like that, or if they're doing good? It's actually good news. I got good news. 56% of Python applications that I found are Python 3 exclusively, with an extra 10% basically that are 2.3 compatible. Only about a third are still on Python 2. I was surprised by this, actually. I've had to do Python 2.3 like transitions, and I figured a lot of these projects would be doing so after 2020. I figured the majority would be. But, you know, I didn't go out looking for these projects in this way. I'll get into the methodology here. I wasn't looking for any particular attributes when I looked at them. It's not a random sample, but it's a sample. So I'm hopeful that this is representative. If we look over time, it's a pretty nice one again, where, like, you know, we've got a good mix of old and new. It's not just new projects that are Python 3 compatible. It's a good mix. And within the Python 3, this is a little bit nuanced. Don't take this the wrong way. What is being said here is that these Python 3 compatible applications are compatible back to this version of Python. So basically, almost half of the applications would work on Python 3.5 as it is. And interestingly, 8% have chosen to go full-on 3.7 only compatible. So now let's take a little intermission and pour one out for the maintainers. We're looking at a lot of, a big body of work here. So each project has a median number of 92 committers. But 43% of the work is done by a top contributor of some sort. You know, it's lonely work writing. Ernest Hemingway has a quote about this that I totally forgot. So, and in fact, 41% of applications are mostly written by one committer. That's over 50%, you know? Like, they have some help, but it's not like a lot, you know? I think we all have this dream of starting something and then like basically having the crowd come in and take over, and you know, the bazaar is just like buzzing around your thing, and like, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Okay, so I'm giving it a spotlight here to edX platform. This is a very large application that is open source, in fact, it's got almost 51,000 commits since 2011. It's a platform for massively open online courses. It powers edX.org. You know, it's like Coursera, this sort of stuff, but it involves universities more. It's the third largest Django project on the APA. It has 300 committers, And it's one of only 3 projects where no one developer has more than 10% of the commit history. So it's really even across the board. It's a mono repo, that's probably one reason why, but it's still really interesting to see. Okay, licensing. This isn't a licensing talk, so I'm gonna make this real quick. Here's a breakdown. Right, I was curious, so I had to look into it. It's a 45-minute talk, and I was just curious. So interestingly, there's a lot of GPL. And LGPL, AGPL, right, and MPL. Over time, I thought that maybe we'd see a decrease, but no, instead all we see is a rise of open source as BSD and MIT sort of start to take off. GPL had the early start, but it's still going strong today. So that's, I think, a pretty interesting finding in itself. And breaking it down, for those who aren't like lawyers, there's this concept of a viral license or a copyleft license. Really what this means is it's basically like if I start a project that derives from your project, I need to use a license that's compatible with your project's license. Like your license requires me to do that. And I have one lawyer friend, his name is Luis, and he prefers the term hereditary because you have to inherit that license as a term of the license. And most licenses, 2/3 of the licenses that we're finding for these applications are true, which I take as like a good sign for free software, But at the same time, 1/3 for false is a little bit high, and I'll explain why I think that is. This is an opinion. Here it is over time. We're not seeing the death of free software yet. So I'm gonna give a spotlight to Sentry, which has had 26,000 commits since 2008. It's a web service and front end for cross-platform application monitoring with a focus on error reporting. It's one of the minority of projects on the site that is actually corporate, right? So you've probably seen them at a Python conference. And basically they make money on this, but it is open source. But it's beyond open source, it's open source, it's 1 million lines of Python. And I was like, is this correct? So I dug into it a little bit more. This makes it the largest Django project on the list. It includes 120,000 vendored libraries. In some cases, 120,000 lines of vendored libraries. I thought that might be what's influencing it. I sort of tried to exclude vendored code, because some applications do that with good reason. The largest Flask app for comparison is Pajur, which is 110,000 lines. And that is a software forge, kind of like GitLab. So if you want like a Python GitLab that's written in Flask, check out Pajur. I don't know how to pronounce it. Hadn't heard of it. All right. But here's what's interesting about Sentry, and the reason why it's under the licensing heading here. It's BSD3 licensed. That's a non-hereditary license. That means that anyone can take this application and just start using it basically for whatever they want, and as long as they don't want a warranty or say that Sentry's advocating for their software, they're good to go. And there's a hubbub around this so we actually use Sentry at work. At my job, Simple Legal, we're hiring DevOps, etc. But what was surprising to me, is that we used to use a service called OpBeat. I think it's a pun on upbeat. Anyone here use OpBeat? They got bought by Elastic. And the weird thing is how easily we transitioned to Sentry. And the reason for that is that OpBeat was just a fork of Sentry. Someone took Sentry's client libraries, at the very least, which have to be open source for people to use them, right, effectively, the SDK. And I don't know what would have stopped them from just taking Sentry's backend as well, right? It's BSD3 license right in the repo. So this is the license of OpBeat's, SDK. And it says right here, renaming in progress. OpBeat is forked from Raven by David Kramer. So David Kramer, founder of Sentry, I believe. And so, I guess what I would say here is that the license in your repository is kind of like a default license. Your SDK can have whatever license you want. Like there are SDKs out there that you need explicit license for, right? The license that lives in your repository isn't like a code for you to live by. It's just a handy shortcut for people not to have to email you to use your thing. I don't know if Sentry did this intentionally and they're just a really big believer in the commons and they want their stuff all BSD3 licensed, but when you choose to make an application a paid service for your company and you want to support free software, open source, sharing your ideas, I would choose the most restrictive license possible, right? Like in this case, it's definitely like an AGPL type situation if you're gonna open source a service that you're working on. Personally, I don't want some commercial entity coming along profiting off of me getting acquired by Elastic for millions and millions of dollars. But thankfully, I think Sentry's doing okay, right? Like they seem to be making bank as well. So, you know, this doesn't seem to be a major issue for them. Okay, finally, packaging. We're coming back to, like, you know, where this all started, right? Like packaging, basically, you know, was the reason I came up with the idea to ask the ecosystem, and now it was finally time for me to ask the ecosystem. 63%, aka 45 out of 71 GUI applications use a packaging technology generally referred to as a freezer. This takes Python and it bakes it into your application, gives you a beautiful setup.exe so that you can have your Windows or Mac users just go in and install your thing, and it looks like a native experience. So the breakdown for that is that 33% of them use PyInstaller, 41% use PyExe, 3% use PyInsist, which is a wrapper around NSIS for you Nelsoft fans. CX Freeze, which I swear to God has been around since probably like 2003 because I wrote a prime number generator that my dad wanted me to email him via Hotmail, and I had no idea how to give him a .py file to run, and so I Googled it and I found CX Freeze, and I don't even think it was Google. It was probably like Alta Vista. Anyways, and Py to app. That's for Macs. Here it is over time. This is another interesting result. Everyone's making Py to app, PyExe, these things work, but PyInstaller seems to have a strong lead for recent times. And in fact, I found that basically, yeah, I have a little spotlight on this, but basically people are porting to PyInstaller, as far as I can tell. It looks like it's doing a solid job of being a freezer. Containerization, another hot topic. For all you Docker fans out there, it's going strong. 75% of the applications have a Docker container of some form or another, Docker file of some form or another. Some of them use it for developer environments, right? It's not necessarily the way that they ship their code, but they are using the technology. But there's a good 1/4 of applications that do have Flatpak, snaps, or app images, which are other container technologies worth checking out, especially if you're targeting Linux. And here it is over time. So you can really see the Docker explosion happening. And you can really see also the influence of the Fedora organization taking, or like whoever does the GNOME stuff, right? Like taking care of their projects and porting them to have Flatpaks. So, and here's the spotlight for OnionShare. 2,500 commits since 2014. It's a secure and anonymous file sharing thing over Tor, the Onion router service. Supports Linux, Windows, and Mac. It's a GUI application, meaning it has a freezer. And it's built on Qt5. And they are the ones that popped out to me as having ported from PyExe and PyApp to PyInstaller. So if you have a GUI application that you want to do something similar, go look at OnionShare. They probably have an interesting story for you. I didn't find any blog posts about it, but it happened. So with that sort of like wrapped up, I want to just have a quick spotlight on the median Python application. Across all 250 repos, I found that the median Python app has around 3,500 commits since 2010. That makes it 9 years old. You know, that's like sort of the maturity that like just ended up getting selected for in this list. This is a list, again, pull requested in and so forth, not all by me. This is what we got. It'd probably be something related to communication or collaboration. Those are the two most common topics. Not really featured here, but there are sort of topic separation, like what is this app for? There have been 39 drive-by committers who've only done one commit. Kind of a fun one. It would support Python 3.4 plus, that is sort of the median position. And it would be 65% Python. And it would have a hereditary license, either GPL or MPL or something like that. So that's what, if you were just gonna like, you know, poof, make a Python application come into existence, that would be what I would guess the profile would be. All right, so that's a long talk about numbers, and we're going to come out of it a little bit. We're going to talk about methods. I didn't make them all up. I know they look convincing, but I have a method to the madness. And so I created this little application called Apatite. It's a type of rock, for you Dwarf Fortress fans. And it starts with APA, Awesome Python Applications. There's not much to it. It's had 69 commits since 2019, 05, 08, 05, so 13 days. Yeah. It's a CLI for managing and analyzing awesome lists, so it's not necessarily just for applications. While doing this, it occurred to me that really what I want to do is I want to make more lists, right? I want to make like a list of awesome Python embeddings. Like Blender is not really a Python app, but they use the heck out of Python inside, you know? And, you know, the awesome Python SDKs, right? Like there are a lot of people out there who want to make an SDK, and there's a lot of best practices that maybe don't get talked about a lot. So we could make a list of corporate SDKs that are open source. It has plugin support. Here's what I used. So I used a Rust application called Toke for the slot count. Yeah, slot count written in Perl is way too slow for this. The Rust thing is really quick. ERP5, which is just a massive, massive application, like it'll count up all the lines for me in like 5 seconds. It's like these new hard drives are just amazing. Go license detector for licenses, which, yeah, it supports like 400 licenses, which is kind of too many. So I had to put some heuristics on top of it. But it's open source, so you can go see what I did. And Vermin for minimum Python detection. Who here has heard of Vermin? Okay, yeah, it's got like, it only had like 70 GitHub stars, but it's a really kind of impressive application. It has all these different versions of Python's AST inside of it for like each version. And so, and it knows things that like 2 to 3 would know about. It knows things that like 6 would know about, like, oh, the capital ABC is not in the ABC module in Python 2.7, it's in 3.5. It knows all these things. And so it has roughly 1,500 rules that it runs on every Python file in order to detect what version of Python is supported. And in fact, it goes down not just at the file level, but at the function level. It'll tell you which functions support which versions of Python. And it's like, amazing. I would have been screwed without this. It takes a long time to run. Run it with a -v flag. There's a quirk in there. I get better results with -v. Okay. So yeah, and then I had dozens of heuristics and lots of manual tagging on top of this. So some things looked like server things that were actually not server things. And so like I said, structured YAML, and there are tags in there. Check it out. And yeah, pandas for graphs, out of band. I'd like to get that in there at some point, so we just regenerate these graphs really easily. But like, thanks to my lovely wife Maya Ayubi, like she, let's get a round of applause for all the PyCharts and stuff. Yay! Yay! Yeah. No, I'd be completely screwed for this presentation. You'd have no numbers, no pretty pictures. You'd have only numbers and no pretty pictures. Yeah, and so you can check it out at this site right here. Okay. So yeah, what's next? I really think we're only getting started here. This has been really, really interesting for me. I think that I see 6 places to go from here. First things first, using the APA. I want all of you out there in television land to reference the list for similar applications when you're building your application. Learn from your exemplars. They're so busy writing their applications that work really well that they don't have time to go to conferences to talk about these things, to write blog posts. It's really hard to do those things. I know a lot of architects that go to conferences, they haven't coded in years, no offense, but like, I don't really want to listen to you about what works in 2019. That kind of thing. And so learn from these working exemplars that have figured things out and worked really hard on that. The amount of overwork, rework that's happening, it's a travesty, honestly. Especially for it to happen in open source. I counted it up. There's over 2,000 years of maintenance on this list right now. Right? That's just the number of years that the project has been existing, right? Like multiplied out. Cite it. A lot of you out there I know write tweets, blog posts, give talks at conferences, write books, do these things. Find some references for your recommendations in this list, if possible, right? Mine this list for patterns. You're talking about like real world design patterns and so forth. Well, here's the real world. Show me in there where the design patterns are. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff buried in that 2,000 years of maintenance. And recruit. One of the hardest things that I've had to face is as like a Python evangelist inside of corporations and going out into conferences is people are saying like, hey, open source seems really cool. I want to get involved. What do I do? And I'm like, I don't know, like Zulip? When I first wrote this list, I could think of 25 open source Python applications off the top of my head, like Sentry, Zulip, and and like 25 others, 23 others. And when someone says I want to get involved, it's really, really handy to just like say, look, here's like a list. Are you into video games or science or something like that? These are projects which are soliciting your help, and you can go get involved there. Especially when you're just starting out, you don't have an original idea. You just want to see how application stuff is working. And a lot of people don't want to make libraries. A lot of people want to make applications. Infrastructure and application developers, systems developers, kind of separate things. And then I also have 3 requests. Help me build the awesome Python applications list. Fix bugs in Apatite, right? So I would love to have auto link checking. Those stale wiki pages, those stale awesome lists, we don't need to do that. Like, let's make a CI job, check it's about 660 links right now, which is way too many to do manually, but way easy to do as part of a CI job weekly. Let's archive projects. If something hasn't been worked on for years, if it's like sort of dead, let's just make an archive for it, right? We can, like Reddit right now is on that list. They closed their source in 2017. They have a blog post about it. No, they have a Reddit post about it. Surprise, surprise. And so, you know, but it's still valuable because they use some interesting architectures. So let's put it in the archive. And also static site generation. So right now, like a list of 250 links with some tags is still not really a great, like, you know, medium for someone to come in and find their like similar projects. So instead, what we need to do is create like a filtering thing where you say like, look, I want something that was roughly started in the last 3 years and is based for multi-users, like it's a server architecture, and I've been looking at using Flask or whatever, right? Like I'd like it to use that architecture, and let's actually make a decision tree so that people can find applications that look like the applications they want to build. And I think that's going to require more than just a README, so let's make a static site for it, perhaps. This is probably one of the easier ones. Basically, let's find more applications. So the way I found these applications is like, off the top of my head, a little bit of searching around GitHub, but there's way too many libraries there. And so I started going to like Alternative 2. Anyone use Alternative 2? Yeah, so you can find like open source applications like there. And I was like, well, what's popular here? Is it popular? Okay, I'll go look on GitHub and see if it's open source. Oh, it's open source? Cool. Like, is it, you know, Python? And if it is, then hooray, I have a new like entry. And it's pretty tedious, but you find some really interesting things. Like FreeCAD is like a huge project. And finally, share, right? Like just share it out. Actually, like, you know, sort of tell people about it and tell them that there are ways to help with it. And maybe even start using some of these applications yourself, because I would love a serendipitous story where somebody starts using a Python application, runs into a bug. Because they know Python, they actually fix that bug. And then we've closed the loop on FOSS. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. Yeah, are there any questions?
Thank you. Really good talk.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm going to get into web framework popularity contests.
Sure.
So in the PSF survey that went out about 6 months ago, it came back as Django and Flask being about equally used, at least as reported. And if you look at the PyPI stats, Flask is downloaded about 3 times more than Django. You know, it looks like Django like clearly wins in the amount of projects actually being published.
Yeah.
What do you think explains that?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, like I said, these stats are like, you know, fresh out of the oven here. So I don't have a super great explanation that I could really stand by. I mean, there's Django Con and there's no Flask Con. So like, there's obvious, you can explain that, right? So it's, I mean, there's biases in the responses and so forth. I think that they're both like approaching the same like kind of tier of like top tier web applications. And yeah, if you like you mentioned the nya.whatever is actually written in Flask, and I found it, and I'm going to be adding to the list. It's going to be application number 255, the Nya BitTorrent tracker.
Yeah, I've got a couple more suggestions for you too. So.
Yeah, exactly. bring the applications on. I'm absolutely like welcoming more like big-boned, full-bodied applications. Yes.
I'm ready. Can you repeat your advice for licensing an initial release of a project?
Yeah, so I would say my personal approach, because I have some applications as well. They're not all on the list. I'm not that nepotistic. But basically, yeah, like my approach is that I just do the most restrictive license, because the fact is that if they want another license, they can just email me and ask for a different license, and I'll consider the case, and I'll give them a different license. That's how licensing is supposed to work. It's not like the law is not, like I know we say code for legal code and that sort of thing, but the law is not really like codified in that way. The license that you put in your repo is just a default license. So make it really, really restrictive, and then if anyone's going to do something weird and nefarious, they have to email you for like permission. Yep. Barry.
If you've looked at anything like the projects that require CLA, agreements, things like that.
No, I haven't actually, right? And the plugin system for Apatite would absolutely support some form of lookup there. I have a lot of stats around like GitHub specific things too that didn't make it in, and there's a ton of stuff about like maintenance. I would love to add more dimensions, and then we can export them in the CSV, and you can pandas away, and maybe we'll like bring it back in as an analysis step in Apatite. I'm super chuffed.
I wanted to see if for the Python apps, if there was some other language that was usually paired with Python.
Yes, I have stats on that. And it's surprising. So like some of I've talked about the Haskell one, right? And there's like another one I found. I was going to do doc stats, but I didn't have time. And there's one project that wrote its entire user manual in Tech, not RST or Markdown. And I thought that was pretty cool. It's like medical software too. Yeah, obviously JavaScript is a very common one. But I have those stats in the CSV, and if you want to like make a little correlation matrix or something like that, I'm in full support. But you just have to contend with a little bit of noise from the slot counting stuff. You got to put some heuristics in there. Yeah.
So I heard you say there has to be a better way. And
sure.
One application that occurs to me is like tracking the uptake of new idioms in Python.
Yeah.
Who's using it and if it's effective. And that'd be awesome.
No, I would love, exactly. I would love data on that. Like a lot of claims get made, and if you can back it up with like these projects that put themselves out there, I think that would be a great one. And so again, more plugins, more like little AST maybe, like to see if stuff has taken off. Yeah, absolutely. Right now, I should mention all of the dependency stuff. That's like via imports. I'm just looking at imports.
Do you think that we need a Python application repository? Or is that the platform's job?
Yeah, no, I mean, we certainly talked about having a PEC store before, right? Like if basically an application can be built in pure Python, you have a zip app of it or something like that, it would be great if somewhere you could just upload that, and for instance, tools like Apatite and Pelican and so forth could actually just be downloaded without having to use pip, and they would just work on whatever platform. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in support of that, but again, I haven't fully thought it through.
Thanks a lot for this. Ignoring the social challenges of this, as you mentioned, discoverability is a really big challenge, right? The work that you had to go through to curate this list. Do you think we could propose some kind of metadata file that you include in a GitHub repo that would include some of this information that you could mine? For instance, right, you have your license file, so it's easy to pull the license information. Could we propose some README metadata framework that would automatically sort of generate these tags and make things searchable across GitHub?
It's a great question. So I have talked to GitHub about that sort of thing. I had this like perverse idea to create a sort of software H-index whereby like, you would have applications as like journals, and then there would be an impact factor of each application. But yeah, I couldn't make the metaphor work entirely. And one issue I see with that is that like GitHub is already like really dominant in this sphere, and like I would say all but about 40 applications that I found are on GitHub thanks to their searchability and discoverability. But a lot of people are running their individual GitLabs, right? Or they're running on Pajur, which is that like Fedora thing. So they have their own microcosms. A lot of people are on HG, which is like Mercurial. And I wish that there was like a way for them to register themselves somewhere, but I don't really know what that looks like. We could start on GitHub. Like if GitHub's going to support that sort of thing, that'd be great. I've absolutely brought it up to the maintainer org there that like, hey, applications are different than libraries, and GitHub really favors libraries because GitHub is a site not for software users, but for software builders. And so stars don't really reflect application popularity. In fact, there's not really a way to track application popularity. And so it's this whole big sort of circle, but like they hadn't even seemed to have thought really about the difference between a library and an application. So.
Given the many possibilities of applications and the possible overlaps, I'm wondering if there's an official or semi-official committee or team that passes on the keywords and the functions of these apps to, like in a super index, a very extensive glossary and index to go on some page somewhere. Does that page exist anywhere?
I have a taxonomy. It's like taxonomy, but tags. So I have a taxonomy that I made myself, yeah, there's no like super index or whatever. I literally like went on CNET and so forth and saw how they broke down like, you know, oh, communication versus collaboration and that sort of stuff to make these topics. But yeah, there is no super index for this. And in a way, it'd be very hard to have this kind of authority. But hopefully the community can like sort of join one together around APA and maybe set an example.
Any more questions? I think over there were, no.
Okay, well, two quick things. If you're at PyGotham, I'll be doing a short version of this talk, and also maybe I'll start a YouTube channel at some point, and it'll be at yak.party, because I like to yak shave, and it's a party. So yeah, all right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.